London, 19th century, the peak of the Victorian era. Soon after the Industrial Revolution, pollution in all its forms spread everywhere. On every street corner, during the summer of 1858, the culmination of all this filth occurred. It became known as the Great Stink, as people were dying and the pollution in London was believed to be the cause of these deaths. Thousands of people died, thousands fled the city, and thousands sent letters to newspapers and other countries seeking help and assistance. They were sleeping and waking up to an overwhelming stench that could kill. But what actually caused this stench? What was happening in London, and how did the Great Stink eventually disappear? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Interesting Day. In today's video, we will travel straight to Victorian London. We will explore the era of the Great Stink and answer all the questions surrounding it. So hold your nose and let's dive into another well-crafted history video to understand how a foul stench emerged in the summer of 1858. To do that, let's take a look back. Before that year, London experienced an uncontrolled population growth due to the Industrial Revolution. From 1800 to 1858, the population tripled, going from 950,000 inhabitants to nearly 3 million. However, this growth was unplanned. For instance, sewers were absent in many neighborhoods, and newly built factories showed no concern for waste and smoke production. In summary, it was decades of accumulated waste, smoke, and other disgusting things throughout the city. Let's delve deeper into this, starting with the streets. London streets were piled with horse manure, and I'm not talking about occasional dirt here and there. Imagine a time when cars did not exist, and people relied solely on horses for transportation, whether for trade, travel, or personal use. Hundreds of thousands of horses produced tons of feces every day, spreading and accumulating on the streets. When these piles of manure became excessive to the point where it was hard to navigate around them, people would gather and pay someone to remove some of the excess or even organize collective efforts to clean them up. In the end, there were tons of horse manure on every street. When we think of the Industrial Revolution, we often imagine those machines and factories producing a lot, and I mean a lot, of smoke. London was one of the capitals of the Industrial Revolution. Some days, it was impossible to see the sky due to the thick smoke, and on other days, it was even difficult to see across the street. You may have seen it in movies set in the Victorian era, those misty streets. Well, that's not fog, it's smoke. Perhaps you've also noticed that people in that era wore dark clothes. That's because it was impossible to wear light-colored clothes. They would get dirty from the smoke the moment you put them on. And to add to the mix, there was rain. If you didn't skip school, you might remember that rain plus smoke equals acid rain. It's a toxic rain capable of destroying vegetation, causing skin problems, and even corroding metal structures or stone monuments. Many ancient statues and buildings in Europe bear the corrosion marks from acid rain during that time. Now, imagine all of what I mentioned: horse manure, factory ashes, and acid rain. It all mixed together, forming a disgusting, dark, and viscous mud that spread through the streets, sidewalks, and the entrance of every residence, from mansions to shanties. No one was spared. This affected every corner of London. But there's more to this era. Sewers did exist, but only in some streets, solely for the purpose of preventing floods. They had nothing to do with waste disposal. Every house had a cesspit in the backyard, where people would do their business or dispose of waste. It was a large hole dug about 6 to 8 meters deep in the ground. When the cesspit became full, if you were rich, you could afford the expensive services of a certain profession. Yes, there was a profession for emptying cesspits. But if you were poor, you would send the children to throw the excrement and garbage into the waters of the River Thames once a day. In some cases, everything was simply thrown into the street. And what's a little rain to someone who's already wet? When the cesspit cleaners couldn't sell the material as manure, they would also dump everything into the Thames, the same river that provided bathing, drinking, and cooking water for the majority of people in London. In 1851, that's when the flush toilet, as we know it today, was invented. Well, the one with the pull cord. But it wasn't a new, expensive device, nor did everyone have the means to install it at home. And even with the flush toilets, the waste still went into the sewers, and the sewers led to the River Thames. Now, with all this explained, we finally arrive at the summer of 1858. I hope it's clear that even before that, London already stank. And it stank a lot. The stench during that time was much worse than the usual foul smell. It was a strong odor that seemed like something rotten was right under everyone's nose. Along with this smell, which made people tear up and even vomit, came death. Thousands of people fell ill and died due to various reasons, mainly cholera and typhoid fever. Automatically, people associated this stench with the deaths. They started to believe that this miasma, this putrid smell wafting through the streets, was what was contaminating people. But after all, where did this smell come from? What was its origin? From the River Thames, and the fact that it was summer. And finally, the river had a low. You know, when the waters of a river dry up in hotter times, the river's low brought to the surface all the pollution and garbage accumulated for decades, tons of feces, industrial waste barrels from factories, household waste, slaughterhouse bones, and even the remains of fish that once lived there, and even old furniture. The River Thames had become the dump of the population and the factories. Its waters seemed like a tomb, a sarcophagus for everything that was rotten and toxic that the city produced. But when its waters dried up, all those things were released like ghosts haunting the city, spreading their horrible smell. There were even personifications of this stench printed in newspapers and magazines as if it were a monster. As I mentioned earlier, thousands of people died, thousands of people fled, thousands of people sought help. The situation became catastrophic. At that time, the germ theory did not exist. We did not have the knowledge that bacteria and viruses exist. However, a doctor named John Snow proposed the idea that consuming polluted water was somehow killing the population. Everyone mocked him, literally laughed. After all, it was easier to believe in the smell, that the diseases came from the smell and not from the water. But well, the smell was something that really bothered, always bothered, but this time it was unbearable, even more so with everyone believing that it was the killer, including politicians. The public coffers had to be opened to deal with the problem. Joseph Bazalgette was the one who took the lead and said, "I have a plan and I can solve the problem." Maybe I can say with conviction that Joseph Bazalgette was a genius of civil engineering, and he is important even for me, for you, who live anywhere in the world. This man was the chief engineer and the inventor of a project that completely transformed every street, every house, every alley in London. I won't go into technical terms here because math is not my strong suit and I'm not an engineer, so let's talk in a simplified way. Joseph's project was full of mechanisms, machines, ideas that even took advantage of gravity or the city's topography. Every street, every block of the city was excavated to provide the population with a comprehensive and functional sewage system, something never seen before in the world. Obviously, this is a project that takes years to complete, and while everything was still in progress, the newspapers made fun of Joseph, depicting him as a mole-faced guy and asking how that would solve the stench. How would digging up the city solve the stench? Well, when the sewer network was completed and accessible to everyone, no one needed to carry garbage and waste to the river anymore. Everything, through a controlled flow of water running in underground tunnels, would end up in the sea. And there were even mechanisms like sewers and treatment plants to prevent flooding. Joseph saved London from the Great Stench and even improved the quality of life for everyone. He introduced to the world a more efficient sewage system and showed how urban planning is important. Only one neighborhood did not receive this sewer network. The Great Stench no longer existed there, but the habits remained the same, and the diseases continued to appear. John Snow was right in saying that consuming contaminated water was the cause of the deaths. After a few more years, the discovery of microorganisms finally came, ending this story once and for all. Then laws were enacted, environmental protection laws began to be created. There is even this illustration here, it's quite comical from that time, called Soup of Monsters. In it we see a frightened woman looking at her teacup through a magnifying glass and seeing the microscopic creatures that inhabit the contaminated water of the River Thames. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining us on Interesting Day. See you next time.